who I'm looking at, right? Do you? That's surprised. So there are things that Prabhupada has said that I think a lot of us think, yes, it's true, but we wouldn't see it in this lifetime. And I always thought, well, why would Krishna allow any kind of economic crisis in our lifetime? Because we have to build the temple in Mayapur, and if there's an economic crisis, there's not going to be money for it. And there's not even going to be that company that's building it. If we don't supply money, they may go out of business. They may go bankrupt, and maybe not in the future when the money is there be able to build it. So I always felt like that. But of course, anything is possible. Although I tend to have a lot of faith in Krishna and believe that he will take care of us and his devotees, and we should all feel that way. But what is happening in the world today is, for us as well as everyone, a wake-up call. But I don't know how it's affecting the general populace. And I would hope it's waking them up, but my experience being a devotee for 50 years and trying to wake up people is they don't wake up easily and they forget easily. So if we get through this thing in a few months, for us as devotees, it's something that should warn us that what Prabhupada has said, the instability of materialistic civilization is a reality. And that for you in Scotland, especially where we have land and we can grow food, I think this is like super impetus to become more self-sustaining, because it's kind of a little bit of a warning that, like Krishna said, okay, maybe we'll get through this one, but we have to be ready for the one where we don't get through, and we have to be more self-sufficient. So Karuna Bhavan, this should be, I think, should be an impetus. I just read something before class that I really liked. Do you have hockey in Scotland? Is that a sport you have? Yes? Okay, so this one hockey star has said, don't follow the puck. Hockey, you knock a puck. He said, don't follow the puck, but anticipate where the puck's going to be and then go there. Don't go after the puck, go where you think it's going to be. So you'll be there when it happens. And business knowledge is always understand the future, be ready for it. So when it happens, you're there. Don't start the company after it happens, start it before it happens in anticipation. That's good business sense. And you see some of the most intelligent people, they're prepared for the future before it comes. I don't know if you've seen that video of Bill Gates. It's from 2015, and he's telling the world how to prepare for an epidemic or a pandemic. And if that was followed to 15, we would have been totally prepared. So to me, this is just a warning and an impetus, be prepared, a reality check that these things can happen. And of course, as we all know, nobody expected this. This was just coming out of the blue, and nobody could expect the ramifications, and we don't know what the ramifications ultimately will be, how long this is going to last, what it's going to take to get through it, the economic consequences, the death toll. We don't know. It's totally out of the blue. But I think for us as devotees, it's only confirming everything we've been learning from Srila Prabhupada about the nature of this world. And when things like this happen, my realization is always, well, it's helpful because it's reminding us through experience what Prabhupada is teaching in his books, because we need that, because it's so easy to just read it in the book and say, yeah, or that's never going to happen now, or it could happen later, but everything's good. I've got a good job, money's coming, I've got my halwa for breakfast, and everything's great. And Prabhupada saying, well, everything can change in a moment. And we're thinking, yes, but that's not going to happen. And now it happens. And so what's so good about this, although it sounds I think, awkward to say this is good, but what's good about it is it's just the teachings of Prabhupada and Bhagavatam coming to life in reality to say, no, 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 it could happen, and not only could it happen, it is happening. And how now do we respond to this? Well, every day at 8 o'clock, which I think is noon at your time. Is that right? Am I 4 hours ahead of you? Is it like 5 to 7 in the evening for you now? Is that the time? 5 to 7? You could nod your head, yeah, because you're muted. Yeah. Okay. It's 5 to 7. Yeah. So every day at 8 o'clock, I give class, Bhagavatam class, and I chose the theme death because of the reality of the situation, and that we're gradually hearing a little bit by little bit, and it's slow, but we're going to be hearing more of some devotee. Maybe we don't know them, who's in critical condition who left their body, and obviously hearing about so many people who've left their body. So this concept of death, it's become very real, and we've been having amazing discussions about it, and we've been seeing it in all kinds of new light. But I think what's so valuable about those classes is that this is real. This is it's not theory, like, oh yeah, people are dying, but I don't know. It's total reality. So and I think it's just like we have to take the reality as Krishna's mercy, because we have built-in mechanism to avoid reality, isn't it? Like anything that's real, that's unpleasant, we have a psychological mechanism to put it away or say it's not going to happen to us, isn't it? Okay, I'll tell you some of the responses to this class, which are quite interesting. Some devotees said to me, I could never even listen to this topic before, talking about death, because we're talking about it an hour and a half a day since Sunday. So we've had 4 classes already, and we're just going through Prabhupada's books about the things he talks about, how to prepare for death, how to leave your body. And so that's the topic. So we've gone through 6 hours of that already, and we'll probably go through maybe another 6. And so some devotees are saying, I could never even talk about this. I was so frightened by it. Just the topic of having to leave my body. I couldn't even allow my mind to go there because I didn't think it could handle it. But by talking about it, discussing it, looking at it from the point of view of Shastra, it is helping me so much deal with these realities that we all have to face. So I think that's an important point. And so other devotees were saying that it's been something that we conveniently push away because it's just something you want to push away. Anything that's miserable, psychologically, we want to push it away. And then we're analyzing. It's quite amazing when we're analyzing this topic. We're analyzing Prabhupada's books from this perspective of leaving the body. And then we're starting to see how so many things Prabhupada is teaching us are, this is how to live so you can leave your body in Krishna consciousness. This is how you prepare yourself to leave your body in Krishna consciousness. And it's starting to become more and more clear that what Prabhupada is teaching us, he's teaching us how to prepare for that final moment. That's like everything is culminating in that. Everything is culminating how we leave the body, and it's culminating in that one thing that so many of us don't want to think about. It's not interesting. We don't even want to think about it, and everything Prabhupada is teaching us is culminating in how to prepare for that. Isn't that interesting? And so if you read Prabhupada's books in that context, you start to see, oh, okay, there's so many stories about devotees leaving their bodies. Parikshit Maharaj, Prithu Maharaj, Bhishma Dev. And then you have the stories of the failures, the Bharat Maharaj. Then you have the neutral stories, Ajamil, who was saved from sin. And then you have the stories of materialistic people dying. You see that theme, it's spread all over Prabhupada's books. How to leave your body. Here are the examples of, what did they do to prepare for death? How did they do it? What was their consciousness? And so we've been discussing that, and it's been so interesting because of all the devotees who say, I couldn't even think about this. I didn't want to think about this. I didn't want to talk about this topic. I didn't want to face it. And the only reason really that I decided to do it was because of what's going on in the world now, because it's a reality that we have to confront. So we could call this a reality check. So Rabindra Sarup said something, and he said, we have a fundamental quarrel with reality. I like this statement. Have you heard that before? Fundamental quarrel with reality. What did he mean by that? I have a fundamental quarrel with reality. I don't like reality. I don't like the way reality is. If I could change reality, if I had a magic wand, change reality, no old age, no disease, no death, live forever. I don't like reality, no unhappiness, no misery. I have a quarrel with reality. It doesn't work for me. And because of this quarrel with reality, which Prabhupada just says, we're Satchidananda in a Asat Achit Nirananda world. We're in a world which is the opposite of who we are, which is why we have this quarrel with reality. And so how do we deal with this quarrel? Well, one of the ways we deal with it is we don't think about it. Isn't it? Okay. I may be temporary, I may be not blissful, this and that. Let's just go drink and have a good time. And we don't have to think about it. That's the way most people deal with it. Isn't it? Drink your way to nirvana. Then you don't have to think about anything. So, and that's why non-devotees have problems at times like this, because they're so unprepared for it. But Prabhupada's talking about this all the time in his books. This is like, we see the world, it's not entirely surprising what's happening, especially the karma that's been created. And a lot of devotees are saying, yeah, it doesn't surprise me that Mother Nature is fighting back now because of all the sins that are being performed. So we are so much more ready to be able to face and deal with this and get lessons from it. But yet still, there's some residuals of the same problem that everybody has in dealing with this. It's hard to face, it's hard to admit, because it rains on our parade. It disturbs our life. We just want to go on, right? Peacefully, everything's fine. And Prabhupada's always saying, you can't control that. I was in a class, and Prabhupada was talking about Parikshit Maharaj leaving his body. He said, so Parikshit Maharaj had 7 days to live. He had a warning. Warning is there for 7 days. He is fortunate, but we do not know if we have 7 minutes or 7 moments. And we're all, when I heard the class, I was 22. So what do you think went through my head? Of course, I have 50 more years at least, isn't it? The fool that I am, that's what I thought. And so it's times like this that break through that psychological mechanism where, no, everything's fine, nothing's going to bother me, I'll live a long time and so forth. So now we have the world lesson upon us instead of the word lesson. The word lesson is preparing us for the world lesson. So that's something that I've been meditating on, how there's this dichotomy between what Prabhupada teaches us and then when it happens in reality, and how prepared we think we are by reading it, and how we intellectualize it. And when we intellectualize, we think, oh, I understand it because I've intellectualized it. And I think sometimes it's the trap to think I understand something because I intellectualized it. By intellectualizing, I mean intellectually, yeah, I can understand what this says. I can analyze it. I can look at it from various points of view. But to think that equals actually understanding it, oftentimes is a vast mistake. The example Prabhupada gives is you can train a parrot to chant Hare Krishna, but when the cat comes to kill it, it will scream. It won't chant Hare Krishna. So it's something like that. Like okay, I can chant Hare Krishna. I was taught. I'm a parrot. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. But the cat comes and ah. So it's a little bit like that for us. You know, yeah, I intellectually understand it. I can give a class on it. I can discuss it with devotees. I know all the shlokas. I know the stories. And then when it comes as a world lesson, then I may not be ready for it at all. And so I think times like this are very sobering, and I don't want to use the word inspiring, but they're helpful. And in my experience of practicing Krishna consciousness, I can honestly say that situations like this are extremely helpful, if not even necessary, that the trials and tribulations are necessary. And I had read something Prabhupada said. What did he say? He said something to the effect that unless these miseries were there, we would never be Krishna conscious because there would be no impetus. Isn't that interesting? Like, who wants misery? And Prabhupada's saying you could never be Krishna conscious without it because there'd be nothing pushing you into Krishna consciousness. Isn't that interesting? Nothing to push us into Krishna consciousness if everything was good. If everything was just fine, there would be no impetus. Because if everything is fine, we've lived for millions of lifetimes without Krishna. We're okay without Krishna. That's the problem. Like, you know, if everything's good and there's no Krishna, somehow or other, foolishly, I'm okay. But if everything's not okay, then I tend to want Krishna because I'm not okay. And statistically speaking, at times like this, interest and attendance in religious practice increases. It's statistically proven. World War I, World War II, 9/11, anytime when the stock market fell in 2008, all these times people became more religious. So that proves Prabhupada's point. That on our own, there's really not a strong impetus to be Krishna conscious if everything just goes well. So the economy is great, this is great, that's great, and then where's the impetus going to come? So you might say, well, the impetus comes from our attraction to the process and attraction. Yeah, but you can't get that far to get the attraction without first being pushed by the misery and suffering. And we know from experience, if people are not confronting the realities of this quarrel with reality of the things of this world that they don't like, if they can't admit it and confront it, it's very difficult for them to take up spiritual life. So times like this just remind us of the world we're living in and the nature of it. And we don't like it, but what can we do? We've chosen to come here. And therefore, I think as devotees, aside from all the practical things we do, we use this time to, remind ourselves of the choice we made to come here and the desire we had to enjoy, and the atmosphere in which we're trying to enjoy can change in a moment like that. Everything can become a problem. And the last thing I want to say is that I think it's important for us to see how we're reacting to this situation. Are we getting upset? Are we getting angry, intolerant? Are we having difficulty coping? What coping mechanisms are we using? Because all of this allows us to self-reflect. If during this time I'm becoming depressed or anxious, or I'm going crazy because I don't have anything to do, etc., that's some feedback from this world about myself. And how do I cope with change? Maybe I don't cope well, and so that's just feedback. How can I cope better with it? I think a lot of devotees like it. There's more time to do hearing and chanting, whatever they want to do. But I think some people are having a really hard time with it. And there's challenges being home, especially if you have a big family, and especially if you don't get along well with your family and now they're around you all the time. At least you can have a pole, 6-foot pole and say, you know. But other than that, you know, you have to deal with them. And these are all times to reflect. And I did a workshop on coping mechanisms in relation to relationships and how you respond with difficult people. And it was extremely enlightening for devotees to reflect on their responses, because they realized the way they respond to difficult people is the way they respond to difficult situations. It's just a coping mechanism that they use. And a lot of times that coping mechanism is entirely toxic or dysfunctional, disruptive, destructive. And when we look at it, when we enable the devotees to look at it, it was a moment of, aha, oh, this is how I'm reacting whenever there's difficulty. I react in this way. I get angry, or I get depressed, or I want to kill somebody, I want to fight the world, or I want to go into isolation, I don't want to see the world. And then devotees started to look at that and ask, why do I do that? Why do I react that way? What's going on with me? Why is that? Why is that my automatic response? What's that connected to? And how can I improve that? So if you're finding in this situation, you're responding in any kind of toxic, negative way, that's a good question to ask yourself. Like, why? What is it, my coping mechanism? And if it's not healthy, why? And if you're responding to the situation well, then I would say, fantastic. Take advantage of all this extra time to cultivate your bhakti, and also to do things that you don't normally have time to do, and increase your hearing and chanting, and especially get more into Prabhupada's books. It's such a good time. Maybe we can say that by the grace of the coronavirus, a lot of devotees will be able to really go more deeply into Prabhupada's books, and that would be a blessing. And it's also a good time to reflect on the sinful nature, or the sins that are going on in the world, and how nature responds to the sins of people. And the last thing, I think, which is obvious, is the threefold miseries. One of the threefold miseries is other living entities, and that we're experiencing that. So you have any comments or questions? I think that's like enough for now. Yeah, that hooks it. So someone, do I have?
I've muted myself now. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. It was just to kind of resonate on that point you made about if we're having difficulty with relationships. I just read recently that having difficulty in relationships is fine. That's natural. But what can't be justified is being cruel.
Right.
So you could have a problem with somebody, and that's fine. That's natural. That's, don't freak out. But if you respond in a cruel, spiteful way, that's the problem,
Yeah, and I think another point, which maybe I need to emphasize a little more, is that for all of us, there tends to be a universal way of responding to bad relationships or difficulties. And it's very, very helpful to recognize that. So maybe, like you say, you respond with cruelty, or maybe if it's not cruelty to a person, maybe you respond to difficulty with cruelty to yourself, something destructive. And to look at that and say, oh, this is that whenever there's difficulty, I respond in ways that are destructive. And start to realize it's universal. And the point is, it is universal. This is what you'll find. Our coping mechanisms tend to be universal. Whenever there's difficulty, we tend to respond in the same way. So your point is well taken. I could add to that also that every response, every need, for every response and every need, or every situation that we have to respond to, every need we have to fulfill, there's a healthy way and an unhealthy way to deal with it. So if some needs to be, if there's a need to be fulfilled, as we all have human needs, there are obviously healthy and unhealthy ways to fulfill it. So that's also something to look at. So, like you're saying, okay, here's a problem in a relationship, which is quite normal. But what's the healthy way to deal with it? And so you could say, okay, there's a problem. Whatever reason there's a problem, what's the healthy way to deal with it? What's the unhealthy way to deal with it? And a lot of us, our coping mechanisms are unhealthy. And we don't even know that there's healthier ways to deal with it. And I think that's important, just to recognize or to ask that question, is there a better way to deal with this? Is there a healthier way to deal with this? Of course, the answer is yes, but we may not know it. But if we don't know it, at least we can look to find it. Look how we can learn from others better ways to cope, which is so important. We can't live in isolation as devotees, so that's why this is so important. And it's not even optional. Someone may say, well, I'm not a relational person, or I'm alone, or whatever. But the problem is we need association. And we can't really exist well in Krishna consciousness without it. So if we have difficulties in relationships, it's really important for us to understand why and be able to improve. Because inadvertently we could create offenses to devotees, and then that affects us. And even though the offense may be coming from more of a not, let's say, a spiritual weakness, but just an inability to be able to relate well, but the problem is it could come out as an offensive way, and then that's bad for our spiritual life. So that point is well taken. And any kind of reflection you can do, if there's any bad relationship, and what did you have to do with that relationship? And how, did you fail to make it better, and why, and what could you have done? That's all helpful. And as the saying goes, the common factor in every bad relationship you ever had is you. You were there. So we can't entirely remove ourselves from the responsibility, even if we think it's the fault of another person, because we had something to do with it. I was recently dealing with a devotee who did something really, really bad. And then I was discussing with other devotees, well, how should we deal with it? And the conclusion was we shouldn't deal with it because it'll just make it worse. So that's sometimes how we have to reflect on things. Okay, I'm in this relationship, I didn't do anything wrong, but now the next step could escalate the problem. And if I don't do anything, then that will actually just let the problem just fade away. So those are questions we have to ask. It's tempting to retaliate, isn't it? I'm right, you're wrong, and I want to let you know. And it really takes detachment and humility sometimes to not retaliate against someone who is, and everyone knows, is wrong. So yeah, these are important things. This is, of course, a topic of another class, but just as a little droplet of an idea of how important, to not minimize the importance of relationships in Krishna consciousness, because it's one of the root cause of bhakti is a devotee association. If I may not be able to get along with everybody, but I definitely need to get along with somebody, a few somebodies. If I can't get along with a few somebodies, that's the problem, right? Understandably, I may not have close relationships with everybody, and I should have at least congenial relationships with everybody, but close relationships may not happen with everyone, but congenial relationships I must have with everyone, and some close relationships I definitely need. And if I don't have that, I'm really setting myself up for trouble, because when I'm having difficulty, then I have nobody to go to and no one to talk to. And let me just add this one point. I had a long conversation about this recently with a devotee who's very concerned that we don't have places to go with people we're close to when we have difficulty, where we can open up and reveal the problem without being judged or in any way condemned. And he was making this point over and over again of how important this is, and how so few of us have those kinds of relationships where we can just go and open up with a friend and say, I need you to hear this, or I need your help, or I just need to talk about it. So if we don't have some good relationships like that, we could jeopardize ourselves when we run into trouble where we need people to talk to, and then we're just trying to fight it ourselves, and we'll often fail that way. And that was noted amongst one of the main reasons when sannyasis were interviewed. Sannyasis who gave up their ashram, one of the main reasons they said was a lack of friendship, lack of support, lack of someone to go to. And sometimes we just may not have the skills to do that, or the ego doesn't allow us to it. But the point is that if that is the issue, we have to deal with it, because we need those kinds of relationships. Is that okay? Anything else you have on it?
Yeah. I just you were making that point that if you can spot it, it means you've got it. So if you see a fault in somebody, and that makes you want to become cruel, or it's very disturbing, then it means you must have something of that in yourself. Otherwise, it wouldn't have that problem. You wouldn't have that problem, would you?
Good chance, yes. It's a good chance you have it, for sure. But a thought that I've had lately, I have many thoughts on this. And one thought I had lately is that you get out of the material world by glorifying the devotees of Krishna, and you stay in the material world by criticizing devotees, which is indirectly a criticism of Krishna. So I think that's an important realization. And maybe you're justified in criticizing, but if there are problems, there's ways to deal with it without condemning a person. I think that's important. The other thing that's really been laying heavily on my mind, just because so many devotees write me letters and how they're disturbed by the behavior of another person. And sometimes I get these letters and they say, I'm so disturbed, I can't stop thinking about that person. And I can't stop thinking about what they did. And so there's a lot of vengeance within them, or hatred, or just anger. And we need to look at this and say, why, even though what the person did was wrong, even though the consequences of what they did was bad, why would you want to carry that in your mind, when your mind and heart is the place where you want to carry Krishna? And the analogy is of the heart like a throne, and Krishna goes on the throne. But now there's no room for Krishna on the throne of your heart, because you've got this other person there and you're shooting arrows at them, or bullets, or whatever. And so you want to replace Krishna on the throne of your heart, and then put this other person there and just throw poison at them. It doesn't make sense. So if you look at it that way, even though what they did was wrong, and we should deal with it, but putting them on the throne of your heart and then shooting arrows at them day after day is utterly ridiculous, because it occupies your consciousness instead of Krishna. So I think that's an important thought that can help a lot of us, because a lot of us are in this position and say, yeah, but they did this, and I won't deny that they did this, and I won't deny that what they did was wrong. But as a consequence, is your coping mechanism to put them on the throne of your heart and throw darts at them. That's a bad coping mechanism. That's self-destructive. And so there's the saying that kind of sums it up. Revenge or criticism is what's happening is you're punishing yourself for the fault of another person. So it doesn't make sense. You did something wrong, and I punish myself for what you did, because now you're occupying my heart and my consciousness. In class today, we were talking about many things Prabhupada said about thinking of Krishna, and there are a lot of things he said about think of Krishna 24 hours a day, be absorbed in thoughts of Krishna, etc., etc. And so this point about the throne and putting Krishna on it, in light of what Prabhupada said, that the goal of Krishna consciousness is to think of Krishna 24 hours a day, then naturally devotee will think, well, what would impede that thinking? What would get in the way? And fault finding would be a good one amongst many things, revenge, hatred, and so forth. And so when you put hatred on your throne and revenge on your throne, then no room for Krishna. And if the goal is to remember Krishna, then if we put something else on the throne, we have failed in following that instruction. Correct?
Yes.
Correct. Okay, School of Bhakti has a question. So what do I hit? Your name, and then I hit your hand, and I hit unmute, and then I hit lower hand.
Hare Krishna.
And now you can speak, right?
Yes.
Okay, wow, I'm getting good at this.
So what I wanted to ask you is that it seems that virus is not avoiding catching devotees, and we also a few devotees also died. So some devotees and maybe even more younger ones as well may be wondering what is the protection of Krishna that he is giving to us, that it seems that also devotees are getting it.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah. Well, first, I would like to say, if you climb on a roof and jump off, the law of gravity is going to work for you, whether you're a devotee or not. It's going to work on you. Or if you're driving your car down the motorway and you fall asleep, then the physical laws are going to work and your car is going to spin out of control, or you're going to run into something. So Prabhupada said that Krishna consciousness is not a challenge to the laws of nature. It's not like the laws of nature don't work. Now, Krishna could arrange for the laws of nature to not work if he wanted. He could protect you like he protected Prahlad, like he protected Thakur. But generally, the way we think is that the kind of protection that Krishna gives us is the protection of our spiritual life. It may not always be the protection of the physical body. And if we don't see it that way, then we would have to say, well, karmically, I wasn't supposed to die, and this virus just came up out of nowhere and it killed me, and actually this was an accident, or it wasn't meant to happen. So we understand that, well, that wouldn't happen, and it looks like the virus is the cause. But karmically, it must be that I was meant to leave my body at this point, whether it's through a virus or an accident or whatever. But the protection of the devotee is the protection of his spiritual life. That Krishna will take care of him spiritually. He'll either go back to Krishna or have the opportunity to continue his bhakti. If a devotee leaves their body in Krishna consciousness, that's a great blessing. And if due to the coronavirus, a devotee went back to Godhead, in a sense, although we're not happy about it, although we're not happy about the virus, we can be happy that they've achieved success in their spiritual life, and they'll always be, their spiritual life will always be protected by Krishna. Just like if we look at Prabhupada, so Prabhupada, we didn't want him to go, and at one point Prabhupada said, then I won't go, I will stay. But even after Prabhupada said that, his body still became worse. He said, okay, I will eat, I will stay, you don't want me to leave. And we all thought, well, Prabhupada had the power that Krishna would allow him to stay. But then Krishna didn't want that. We would never think that Prabhupada's not protected by Krishna. We would just think that's Krishna's desire at this point. So that's how a devotee should see it, that I'm always protected by Krishna. And if you're physically not protected, that's Krishna's desire. That's what it means. Is that okay? Or not okay? Yes?
Put your phone down.
Okay, who has a question now? Or a comment for discussion? If you raise your hand, all right. Kartik, I hit Kartik.
Yes, Prabhu.
Kartik, you're speaking?
Yeah. Yes, Prabhu. So, what
What did you do? You just unmuted yourself, right? Yeah.
I just muted myself.
I'm new to Zoom. I just want to. You unmuted yourself, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, what would we? So, there are some people who still think that when the coronavirus thing came out, they said the children and youngsters they are not at high risk of dying.
Yes.
So there are few people who think that okay, I'm not going to get it. If I'm going to pass it, what can I do? I will anyway pass it. So there are people like that, and there are people who are confining themselves as well. But in general, they're not afraid of death. So they're saying that okay, we are fine for the moment, right? At least when the death comes, we will think about it at that time. So what do we tell them?
Tell them, well, I have a gun in my pocket. Would you like me to kill you? Since you're not afraid, is that a problem? And of course it's a problem. You know, this point was brought up to Prabhupada. And he said, why, if you're walking across the street and a car is heading for you, why do you run away? Because obviously you don't want to die. So to say I'm not afraid of death, that's not a realistic statement for most people, unless they're transcendental or they're completely drunk or very much influenced by the mode of ignorance. And I mean, if it was an actual conversation with a person, I would say, everyone's afraid. And it's easy to say I'm not afraid when I'm not confronted with it. But when we're confronted with it, it's a much different experience. And if you are contaminated with the disease, okay, this is an interesting point. Because if I'm contaminated with the disease, then I can contaminate others because I'm carrying it. And should I not care, it doesn't matter. Then I could say, well, let me just go out in the world, because if other people get the virus, it's just their karma, and they were going to get it anyway and get sick. And, it's not how we think. Our philosophy is not training us to be socially, I don't want to say irresponsible, but socially null. Just like we don't care, but we do care. It's like the example, one devotee was just having a discussion. He said, well, all these cattle are being raised for slaughter, but they must be butchers from their last life. So why would we care? They're just butchers from their last life. So we shouldn't interfere. They're not sacred cows. They're cattle raised for slaughter. But that's not how a devotee sees. A devotee can't see that way. A devotee, he doesn't like to see people suffer. He doesn't want to see people suffer. Then you say, well, that just means spiritual. He doesn't want to see people suffer, be to birth and death. But actually, a devotee doesn't want to see people suffer in any way. And there's a story. There are several stories with Prabhupada when he would see people suffering. I'd be very concerned. And it wasn't spiritual suffering, it was material suffering, like hunger, or people working very hard, going to work very early, like being on the road at 6 a.m. and it's crowded. And where are they going? Through the Prabhupada, they're going to work. He said, they're working so hard. He felt that. And that's the natural heart of a devotee. The word I was looking for is callous. So a devotee is not callous. Oh, I'll go out if they're meant to die, they'll die, and it's just their karma. But it doesn't think that way because that doesn't reflect compassion. And compassion is not compartmentalized. I think a lot of devotees think compassion is compartmentalized. In other words, when I preach, I'm compassionate. I care about people. I want to give them Krishna consciousness. But other than that, I don't really care what happens to them. But it's not actually like that. Of course, there's some philosophy there that says, well, whatever you can do for someone physically is not the best thing. So you want to help them spiritually. Yeah, that's definitely true. But it doesn't mean when you're in a situation to do something that could prevent people from suffering materially, that you wouldn't do it. Or if you could be the cause of their material suffering, you wouldn't care, because it goes against the universal nature of your compassion. And I've seen this with other devotees also. They're so compassionate, they just don't want to see people suffer in any way, shape, or form. So they're not callous to the suffering of people. They're concerned, obviously. And then there's one other thing, because this came up a couple of weeks ago. Some devotees wrote me, and just when they were being asked to stay in, I think in many countries, first you're asked to stay in, and then later they pass a law and say, no, you can't go out, and all these stores must be closed. So it goes in phases, at least in some places. So it was going in that phase in one country, and devotees wanted to go and harm them. Government was saying, please stay home. And she was asking me, well, what should we do? And I was saying that from my perspective, there's two perspectives. One, what is healthy for people? And number two, we don't want to work against governments. So governments say, do this. We don't want to go against it. And we don't want to be seen in the world as people who don't care. So socially irresponsible in that way. So I think that's important, because as devotees, we may look at things too philosophically and say, well, philosophically, holy name should be heard in the holy name. Maybe it'll cure the coronavirus and this and that. Well, obviously, if we had evidence that it would cure it, we would invite the whole world to chant and say, this will cure it. Everybody chant. But we know devotees who chant 16 rounds a day, still we're getting the virus. So that's how I would take it. But I think that point about compassion is misunderstood, and I think it's a very important point, and it's described by Sanatana Goswami. Because Sanatana Goswami says that it's not that you're compassionate to people spiritually, and then your compassion stops at that point. And then when you look at people materially, you just like don't care what happens to them. You're completely callous. It's just your karma, whatever. What he said was, if you are in the vicinity of a person who's suffering materially, and you are able to help them, and that help is not in any way restricting you spiritually, harming you spiritually, restricting your service and so forth. Just like maybe you're somewhere and you've got like 10 coats on because it's so cold and there's a homeless person. You just go, here, take one of my coats. There's no problem for you to do that. And the person is suffering. He said, you should do it, because if you don't do it, it makes your heart callous. Your heart becomes harder. And that was also in the story of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, when there were beggars. He was in Vrindavan and there were beggars, and he told his grihastas, said, you should give to the beggars, because if you don't give, your heart becomes hard. And if your heart becomes hard, how can you practice bhakti? So that's another way of looking at it. You should extend your compassion universally, as I said. But if you don't show compassion to people in general, then it means your heart is becoming hard, and the hard-hearted person can't be Krishna conscious. So I think that's important to understand. I don't know if everyone would give that answer, but that's my realization. And then, It's like, I think some devotees become callous just because it doesn't, material life and the material world and all that doesn't seem important. It's like, well, what does it matter if a lot of people die? They're not devotees. So why would we care? Devotees could think like that. It's not important. But that's not the way we think. It's not the way, it's, obviously our movement isn't, we're not meant to open hospitals. We're not meant to do this and that. But it's not that we don't care, and it's not that when there are situations where people need our help and we can give it, we wouldn't, because it's not our philosophy to help you, because this would only help your material life. All right, so that's the case, then, we don't care about animal slaughter, we don't care about abortion, we don't care about anything else. We do care about these things, but we're not, so what do? We protect cows. We don't go blow up abortion clinics. That's not our point. But if there's anything we can do in this situation to prevent people from suffering, why wouldn't we do that? Right? Especially if you're a carrier and you go out, that's like socially so irresponsible. Because then you'll be the cause of people dying, indirectly. Right? So if some elderly person, you come in touch with an elderly person, they get it, they die. Well, you could say, well, it's just karma, you're supposed to do that. But yeah, so go shoot somebody and tell them it's their karma. That's not the way we think. So now you implicated this person, so you're the cause of their death. So there's going to be karma on you, because it could have been prevented. Is that okay?
Yes, Prabhu. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to hit Mary. It's your turn, Mary. Okay.
Hi, Krishna Prabhu. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate your insights. You've kind of answered my question. My question was going to be, what, as an outreach group, what can we do at this time when we are within isolation situations? Harinam, prasadam distribution, it's all quite difficult at the moment, and what our social responsibilities are and how we can work within our individual communities to spread the holy name. Thank you.
I have a couple ideas. I'm glad you asked this, because there's going to be a point maybe where the government would allow us to serve people who are in a critical condition, so we could bring prasadam to those. Let's say there's people that can't go out because they're infected and they're very sick. We may want to start delivering prasadam. That could be elderly people, whatever. But another thought on this is that because of what's going on, people are very, very open now to what we have to say, because what we have to say is in front of them, and so it's very easy to communicate that. Oftentimes we try to communicate this and people say, oh, I'm happy, everything's fine. Well, it's hard to say that now because of the reality. And the worse it gets, the more they'll understand this. So I think, our Krishna conscious social responsibility is now to think of ways in which we can reach more people with our message, like this, doing classes online, contacting your group, like your college students and university students, or the normal Sunday feast, and say, we're going to have this Sunday feast online, send an invitation to your mailing list, talk about how to cope. I think what would be good also, I'm not sure how to get this information. Maybe it's out there. Maybe we have to ask, what are the challenges you're having now personally? One devotee told me that some people are having the challenge of being alone with themselves. They've never been alone so much with themselves, and they're finding that they don't like it. They're having difficulty being with themselves. And so being able to administer knowledge to help people deal with whatever it is they're dealing with, problems in relationships, because they're so close to the people they're living with, or they're just on their phones all day because they don't know what to do, they're bored. So reaching out to people in times like this to deal with what they're dealing with and using the internet for that, I think would be part of what we should be doing. There's a purport, unfortunately it's on my phone, but it's a purport I just read before we began speaking about what was going on in the world at the time of King Vena. And King Vena was a very bad king, and the world was suffering. And so Prabhupada said the Brahmins intervened and they removed Vena. They actually killed him. He was dangerous. If you think Donald Trump is bad or whoever your local leaders are bad, King Vena, oh my God, he was horrible. When he was a kid, he used to kill his friends. They didn't like him, he killed them. He was horrible. So the Brahmins killed him because he was so destructive. And so there's a whole purport about there about how the Brahmins are concerned about people. You know, this was a huge concern. He said that's what Brahmins do. And so going back to the last question and relating it to your question, I think it's important because if you read Prabhupada's books, you see this concept coming up that the Brahmins are concerned about the welfare of people. And this is totally, the concern is not totally spiritual. They're concerned about the material welfare of people. And Prabhupada talks a lot about how the Kshatriyas took care of the citizens, everybody was happy. This is totally on the material level. And that's not something that we often talk about. But here in this situation, Brahmins, that's, you know, we're the Brahmins. He said, Brahmins are concerned. And here was a situation in which the world was suffering because of the reign of King Vena. And the Brahmins were meeting. What are we going to do? People are suffering. We have to do something. So in any way we can relieve people's suffering, we should be thinking, well, how could we do that? You know, writing people, writing your friends, sending emails, sending out newsletters to your mailing list, whatever we can do to help them. And then, as I said, isolating let's learn what people are dealing with now. Where do they need help? And then administering that kind of information. This is how you deal with this. This is how you deal with that. It'd be really good. I was actually thinking about doing an online course, you know, of dealing with all these areas that we're all struggling with now. I think it would be extremely valuable. Maybe I'll do it and I'll give it to you, and then you can send it out to all your friends and mailing lists and like that. And if you have contact with anyone who's giving you feedback about what they're dealing with, let me know, and then I could just go down the list and we could talk about it. And so these kinds of things, you know, timely things that could relate to a lot of people, I think that's our responsibility. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Anyone else have a question or a comment? Sometimes when no one has a question, I just call on them. I won't do that. I won't embarrass you. Right. So, what should we do at Hoxha? We should end now? Is that the plan?
Roshini has a raised hand.
Okay. I'm going to get some better light and you can see me better, maybe, perhaps. Hold on. Let me just close the window behind me, which is, it's not actually my effulgence, it's a window. So it'll be better. You'll get to see me better. Okay. Some improvement. I'll sit like this. Okay. Better, huh? A little better. Okay. Roshni.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, I've just unmuted.
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you. Okay.
Yeah. You know, all that you spoke you're speaking is really good, and I think what came to my mind just now was when Parikshit Maharaj was hearing to Srimad Bhagavatam from Shuka Goswami, and I believe at that time, all the demigods and the devas and the devtas came down and were offering him the amrit, the pot of nectar, saying, we'll give you this and you can live forever. Can you give us the Bhagavata in return? And he said, I think the person who knows the value of Krishna consciousness and the Bhagavata would probably never even ask for a nectar. And he said, I know the value of Amrit and I know the value of listening to the pastimes of Krishna and the Supreme Lord. So I would rather ask not to be born again than to live forever and ever and ever. So my spiritual master always says that, imagine if one person was to live forever 300, 400 years, if given the opportunity in the same place, in the same city, because we are in the material world, we are always going to be having some problems with our mortal self. So that we cannot avoid. But only thing is, if we have the chance to live, we will just be living without, with still being infected by so many things. So I think Parikshit Maharaj asked for the chance of, my master says, if you are given any opportunity, if a devotee is given an opportunity, you should ask for not to be born again. It's not to live forever, sort of a thing, if given the opportunity. And I think through all the devotee association and reading Prabhupada's books or listening to my guru, I think one thing is, I think we are all aware of it, and it's like even what we get, we may not like, but it's Krishna's mercy, and there is a reason behind it. And I think that's how I take this whole coronavirus thing as well. It's like, if at all it happens, something comes to me or my family members, well, this is also Krishna Prasadam, and that's how devotees gracefully will take it. And I think we need to get tuned into that mode of understanding. And I think what you said was kind of reiterating that whole point.
Thank you for that. You made me think of something else, which I forgot to mention, which is embedded in what you said, is that this coronavirus obviously makes us confront a reality of our limited ability to control what's going on. But because if anyone could control this situation, they would definitely love to control it as best they can. And all the scientists and doctors are struggling to deal with it. And so, as you said, Maharaj Parikshit, more or less, he's accepting what's happening. And that's the huge challenge for us, to accept what's happening. And like you said, if it happens, then we'll deal with it. We'll take it as Krishna's mercy or Krishna's desire. And that's one of the big lessons that's so hard to learn, because we don't want to give up control. I mean, we're coming into this world to imitate Krishna, and so imitation means controller. And it's so hard to give up control of things that are going a certain way, not the way we want. So that's another big lesson now. And those who can't give up control, those who can't allow things to happen that are happening, they suffer the most. That's where the hysteria comes in. That's where the fear and stress comes in. So they can't go along with what's happening. And that's such an important lesson. And we were talking about in our class, we were talking about death, and said, well, death is the ultimate loss of control. And if there's just minor situations we can't control and we're upset about, well, what to speak of death, how does that prepare us for leaving? Which is such a bigger test. And so all these experiences are preparations. Sometimes boxers, when they're training, they'll fight a bigger person than they're going to fight in the actual event, because they want to try to do something that's harder than the actual event. But I think death is like that big boxer, so big that we've never fought before. So if we can't deal with the little boxer, then that's a problem. And so Krishna is giving us opportunities through these times when things are difficult. He's giving us opportunities to practice Okay, here's a problem. Here's a situation. Can you give up the need to control this? Can you let it happen as it's happening? You try your best to deal with it, but beyond that, what can you do? That's a necessary practice, and that's one that I find many devotees and non-devotees, I'll say, many non-devotees and devotees as well, sometimes have a really difficult time with. So thank you for reminding me of that point. Hare Krishna. So, anyone else dying to say something, or you're dying to go to sleep? Is that it? It's late for you? No, what time is it for you? 8 o'clock? Is it 8 o'clock for you out there? Yes? It's not that late.
Yes, we're coming up to 8 o'clock.
Yeah, okay. So you want to end now? You had enough?
Prana, you got anything?
Brenda has something.
No, I'm fine.
Brenda, you can speak? Brenda, you can speak. You're unmuted now, Brenda. You want to speak, Brenda, or was that an accident?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you know someone, you don't know them very well, but you want to reach out to them. So you just saying how can I help, or you know, could it be too delicate situation, or you just
What's going on? How you doing? Get them to talk. What I've found is that everybody has so much going on inside of them that they need to talk about, that they would like to talk about. And if they get the opportunity to talk about it, especially women, they like to talk more than men. Sometimes men are a bit closed. But if you give them the opportunity to talk, a lot of times they'll just open up. You don't even have to ask them specifically anything about anything, just like how you doing now, what's going on, what's on your mind, you okay, you coping with everything, anything I can do, something like that, and then see what happens.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we were hoping, Prabhu, that we could do the same again next week, and maybe
Same time, same place.
Yeah.
And you bring up the topic.
Yeah.
Send me a new topic.
Yeah.
And see how we're doing.
Yeah.
Also, if anyone has questions, we could deal with the questions right from the beginning. If come up with questions during the week.
Yeah.
And we can do something with some of the students that are coming and some of the people that come on Sunday. It would be nice to invite them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Prabhu. That was so nice.
You're welcome. Glad you liked it. Hare Krishna. I think I'll do my online course of how to cope with. I think it's something important. And we can get it up and edit it and then send it out to people. Okay. So, Raghunath, am I in control of turning everything off? Or you're going to take control and turn it off? Because I don't see how on my phone I can do that.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Hare Krishna.
Gauranga.
Hare Krishna.